I never expected my life to change in a Phoenix convention center on the hottest day of summer. Standing behind that podium, adjusting the microphone with sweaty palms despite the air conditioning, I was Dr. Erica Howard, autism specialist extraordinaire, 52 years old, recently divorced, and desperately trying to convince myself that my research was enough to fill the hollow spaces in my life. Sensory processing differences aren't deficits, I declared to the packed auditorium. They're neurological variations that require environmental adaptations, not behavioral corrections. The familiar rhythm of my presentation usually calmed my nerves, but today felt different. My green eyes scanned the sea of faces, mostly fellow researchers and therapists nodding politely. Then, in the back row, I spotted her. Blonde hair cascaded over her shoulders, framing a face that radiated intense focus. She wasn't taking notes like everyone else. Instead, those striking blue eyes held mine with unwavering attention, as if she could see straight through my professional facade to the woman underneath. I stumbled slightly over my next point about sensory-friendly environments, catching myself before anyone noticed. Except her. A small smile played at the corner of her lips, and I felt heat rise in my cheeks that had nothing to do with the desert climate outside. "Any questions?" I asked, hoping to regain my composure. Multiple hands shot up, but my attention was drawn magnetically to the blonde in the back row. She stood gracefully, her voice carrying clearly across the auditorium. "Dr. Howard, your research focuses on clinical settings, but what about hospitality environments? Hotels, resorts, recreational spaces?" Her question was intelligent, nuanced, but it was her tone that caught me off guard, warm honey with an underlying challenge that made my pulse quicken. "That's an interesting point," I managed. "Most hospitality venues lack proper accommodations." "Exactly." She stepped slightly into the aisle, commanding the room with quiet confidence. "What if someone created a retreat specifically designed for neurodivergent individuals? Would your sensory integration principles still apply?" The question was brilliant, and she damn well knew it. I found myself leaning forward, genuinely intrigued despite my flustered state. The principles would absolutely apply. In fact, a properly designed sensory retreat could be revolutionary for the autism community. Our eyes locked across the crowded room, and for a moment, everyone else faded away. This wasn't just academic discourse anymore. There was something electric in the air between us, a connection I hadn't felt in years. "Thank you, Dr. Howard," she said, settling back into her seat with that mysterious smile. The rest of the queue and a session blurred past. I answered questions mechanically, while my mind raced with curiosity about the woman who'd challenged me so eloquently. When I finally dismissed the crowd, I watched her gather her things slowly, clearly waiting. My hands shook slightly as I packed my presentation materials. I'd given hundreds of lectures over my career, but none had left me feeling this unsettled. The divorce papers were barely 6 months old, and here I was, captivated by a stranger's blue eyes and brilliant questions. As the auditorium emptied, she approached the stage with confident strides. Up close, she was even more striking. Tall and elegant in a way that made my breath catch. "I'm Julia Lee," she said, extending a manicured hand. "I own Desert Oasis Resort here in Phoenix." Her handshake was firm, warm, lingering just a moment longer than necessary. I felt a spark of awareness travel up my arm. "Erica. Your presentation was fascinating, Erica. I wasn't just asking hypothetical questions up there." My eyebrows rose. "You actually run a sensory-friendly resort?" "I'm trying to. It's been my passion project for 3 years now." Julia's enthusiasm was infectious, her whole face lighting up. "Would you be interested in seeing what we've built? Maybe over coffee?" Every rational part of my brain screamed that this wasn't professional. I didn't know this woman. I was supposed to fly back to Seattle tomorrow morning. But something in Julia's blue eyes made my usual caution evaporate like morning dew in the desert sun. I'd like that very much. Coffee became dinner became a revelation I hadn't seen coming. Julia chose a quiet gastropub downtown, far from the convention crowds, where low lighting softened the sharp angles of my day and made everything feel more intimate than I'd intended. "So, you actually built this resort from scratch?" I asked, genuinely impressed as Julia described her 3-year journey creating sensory-friendly accommodations. My nephew is on the spectrum, she explained, fingers tracing the rim of her wine glass. Watching him struggle during family vacations broke my heart. Kids like him deserve beautiful spaces too. The passion in her voice stirred something deep in my chest. Here was someone who understood the isolation I'd spent decades studying, but from a completely different angle. While I analyzed it clinically, she'd created solutions. That's remarkable, Julia. Most hospitality owners see accessibility as an afterthought. Not me. Her blue eyes held mine steadily. I believe everyone deserves sanctuary. The word hung between us, loaded with meaning I wasn't ready to examine. Sanctuary. When had I last felt truly safe anywhere? Tell me about the sensory rooms, I said, steering the conversation back to safer ground. Julia's whole demeanor shifted as she described weighted blankets, adjustable lighting, noise-dampening walls. Her enthusiasm was magnetic, drawing me in despite my professional skepticism. But it wasn't just her words that captivated me. It was the way her hands moved as she spoke, elegant gestures painting pictures in the air. The way she leaned closer when making a point, close enough that I caught her scent, something warm and desert-influenced. You should see it for yourself, she said suddenly. I mean, for your research. My rational mind immediately supplied a dozen reasons why that would be inappropriate. I barely knew this woman. I was supposed to fly home tomorrow. I had patients scheduled, a practice to run, a carefully ordered life waiting in Seattle. I couldn't impose, I heard myself saying, even as every fiber of my being wanted to say yes. It's not imposing if I'm inviting you. Julia's smile was devastating in its simplicity. Besides, you're the expert. Your feedback could help refine our programs. She was offering me professional cover for what felt increasingly personal. The smart thing would be to politely decline, exchange business cards, maybe follow up with a phone call in a few weeks. I suppose I could extend my stay by a day or two, I said instead, surprising myself. Julia's face lit up like sunrise over the desert. Really? That's wonderful, Erica. The way she said my name sent unexpected warmth spiraling through me. When had anyone made my own name sound that appealing? I'll need to change my flight, I said, pulling out my phone before I could reconsider. Already handling it, Julia said with a grin, fingers flying across her own device. My assistant can arrange everything. Desert Oasis has partnerships with all the major airlines. Her efficiency was both impressive and slightly overwhelming. This woman was accustomed to getting what she wanted, and right now, what she wanted was me at her resort. The realization should have been alarming. Instead, it was thrilling in a way I hadn't experienced since college. You work fast, I observed. Life's too short for hesitation. Julia's tone was light, but something deeper flickered in her expression. Besides, good opportunities don't come along often. Was she talking about business opportunities or something else entirely? The ambiguity sent my pulse racing. I found myself studying her face, noting the laugh lines around her eyes, the confident set of her shoulders. She was beautiful, but more than that, she was substantial. A woman who built things, who created safe spaces for vulnerable people. Tell me about yourself, Erica, she said, shifting the focus before I could analyze her further. What made you specialize in autism research? I launched into my standard biographical sketch, the same professional summary I'd given 1,000 times. Graduate school at Stanford, postdoc at Johns Hopkins, 15 years building my Seattle practice. Safe, clinical details that revealed nothing important. But Julia wasn't having it. That's your resume. I asked about you. Her directness caught me off guard. I'm not sure what you mean. What drives you? What makes you passionate about this work? No one had asked me that in years. Not my ex-husband, not my colleagues, certainly not my patients. The question hung in the air between us, demanding honesty I wasn't prepared to give. I suppose I've always been drawn to people who see the world differently, I said carefully. Julia leaned back, studying me with those penetrating blue eyes. That's still the professional answer. Try again. Her challenge sparked something rebellious in me, a part of myself. I'd buried under years of academic propriety and marital compromise. Maybe because I've always felt like an outsider myself, I admitted. The confession surprised us both. Julia's expression softened, and she reached across the table, her fingers brushing mine briefly. Thank you, she said simply, for being honest. That touch, barely there and gone too quickly, left my skin tingling. I stared down at my hand, trying to process the unexpected electricity of such minimal contact. "So," Julia said, her voice slightly huskier than before, "ready to see what sanctuary looks like?" Desert Oasis Resort took my breath away. Julia's vision had materialized into something extraordinary, a sprawling property of earth-toned buildings nestled against red rocks that seemed to emerge naturally from the Phoenix landscape. As we walked the grounds in the soft morning light, I found myself genuinely awed by her achievement. "Every pathway is designed for sensory comfort," Julia explained, gesturing to the smooth, wide walkways bordered by native plants. "No sudden elevation changes, consistent textures underfoot." I knelt to examine the surface, noting the careful attention to detail. "This is remarkable, Julia. The guests must feel incredibly safe here." "That's the point," she said, watching me with evident pride. "Safety first, luxury second." We continued the tour through common areas where soft lighting filtered through. Fabric panels and quiet zones offered retreat from overstimulation. Julia had thought of everything, from adjustable sound levels to tactile walls designed for self-regulation. "The pool area is my favorite," she said, leading me toward the back of the property. The moment we stepped outside, I understood why. The pool sat like a blue jewel surrounded by carefully maintained desert gardens. Shade structures provided options for different light preferences, while the water featured adjustable jets for various sensory needs. "This is incredible," I breathed, spinning slowly to take it all in. "You've created something revolutionary here." Julia moved closer, close enough that I could feel the warmth radiating from her skin in the desert air. "It means everything to hear you say that, Erica. Your opinion matters." Something in her tone made me look up sharply. She was studying my face with an intensity that made my stomach flutter. Professional admiration was shifting into something far more personal, and we both felt it. "Julia," I started, not sure what I intended to say. "I know," she said softly. "I feel it too." The admission hung between us like a bridge I wasn't sure I was brave enough to cross. My marriage had ended partly because I'd felt so disconnected, so unable to be truly seen. Yet here was this woman I'd known for less than 24 hours, looking at me like she could see straight into my soul. "I don't usually," I began, then stopped, flustered. "Neither do I," Julia said with a gentle smile. "But there's something about you, Erica. From the moment I heard you speak yesterday, I knew you were different." We stood there beside the pool, desert wind stirring her blonde hair as the sun climbed higher. Everything about this moment felt surreal, like I'd stepped out of my carefully controlled life and into someone else's romantic fantasy. "Show me the guest rooms," I said, needing movement to process what was happening. Julia led me through several accommodations, each tailored to different sensory needs. Blackout curtains for light sensitivity, white noise machines for auditory processing, weighted blankets for tactile comfort. Every detail spoke of deep understanding and genuine care. "This room is my masterpiece," she said, opening the door to a corner suite. "Complete control over every environmental factor." I walked inside, marveling at the thoughtful design, but found myself distracted by Julia's presence behind me. When I turned around, she was standing closer than I'd expected, her blue eyes dark with something that made my breath catch. "Erica," she said quietly, "I need you to know this isn't just about business for me." My heart hammered against my ribs. "What are you saying?" "I'm saying that yesterday, watching you speak with such passion about creating understanding. For people like my nephew, I realized I haven't felt this drawn to anyone in years." Her honesty was devastating. Every rational part of my brain screamed warnings about moving too fast, about professional boundaries, about the complexity of starting something with a woman when my heterosexual marriage had just ended. "I'm not sure I'm ready for this," I whispered. "I'm not asking you to be ready," Julia said, stepping closer until I could count the flecks of silver in her eyes. "I'm just asking you to be honest about what you're feeling." My body was making the decision before my mind could interfere. I found myself reaching up, my fingers barely brushing her cheek, marveling at the softness of her skin. "I'm feeling terrified," I admitted, "and alive in a way I haven't experienced in years." Julia's smile was radiant. "That's enough for now." She leaned down slowly, giving me every opportunity to pull away. Instead, I rose on my toes to meet her halfway. Our lips touched softly at first, a question being asked and answered. Then deeper, as her arms slipped around my waist and mine found their way to her shoulders. The kiss was everything my marriage had never been. Gentle but urgent, respectful but passionate, like coming home to a place I'd never been before. When we finally broke apart, both breathing unsteadily, I felt fundamentally changed. "Damn," Julia breathed, resting her forehead against mine. "My thoughts exactly," I whispered, surprised by my own boldness. We stood there in the quiet guest room, holding each other as afternoon shadows lengthened outside. For the first time in years, maybe decades, I felt completely present in a moment, completely connected to another human being. "Stay for dinner," Julia said softly. "Please." Looking into her eyes, I realized I'd already made my choice the moment I'd agreed to come here. Whatever this was between us, whatever it might become, I wasn't walking away. I'd love to. One dinner became 3 days. I kept telling myself I was conducting research, documenting Julia's innovative approaches for my next paper. But the truth was harder to admit. I couldn't bring myself to leave. Every morning I woke up in the resort's guest suite, promising myself I'd book the flight home that afternoon. Every evening found me lingering over wine with Julia, talking until the desert stars emerged. "You should cancel your Seattle appointments," Julia said over breakfast. On day 3, her tone carefully casual as she buttered toast. "Stay the full week." My coffee cup hesitated halfway to my lips. "I can't just abandon my practice, Julia. 1 week won't destroy your career, Erica. When's the last time you took real time off?" The question hit uncomfortably close to home. My ex-husband had asked the same thing repeatedly during our marriage, watching me disappear into work while our relationship withered from neglect. Now here was Julia, asking me to step away from the very career I'd used as armor against intimacy. "That's different," I said weakly. "Is it?" Julia reached across the small table, her fingers finding mine. "Or are you scared of what might happen if you actually let yourself want something just for yourself?" Her directness left me breathless. In 3 days, she'd learned to read me with unsettling accuracy, seeing through defenses I'd spent decades perfecting. "Maybe I am scared," I admitted. Julia's thumb traced gentle circles on the back of my hand. "Good. Fear means it matters." That afternoon, she insisted on showing me her favorite desert hiking spot, a hidden canyon accessible only by 4-wheel drive. As we bounced along the rough track in her Jeep, I found myself laughing at something she'd said, the sound surprising us both. "You have a beautiful laugh," Julia said, glancing over with a smile that made my chest tight. I'd almost forgotten I had one. The trail wound between towering red rocks, leading to a secluded pool fed by a natural spring. Julia had packed a picnic, complete with wine that sparkled in crystal glasses, somehow produced from her hiking pack. "You're full of surprises," I said, accepting the glass with bemused admiration. "I believe in making every moment count," she replied, settling beside me on the blanket she'd spread near the water's edge. The canyon walls created perfect acoustics, our voices echoing softly as we talked about everything and nothing. Julia told me about growing up in California, her family's initial resistance to the resort dream, the lonely nights spent planning something nobody else understood. "Building this place saved me," she said, staring into the clear water. "After my last relationship ended, I needed something that was completely mine." "What happened?" I asked softly. Sarah couldn't handle the scrutiny. Being with a woman who owned a business, who was visible in the community, she wanted to stay hidden forever. The pain in Julia's voice was raw despite the years that had passed. I recognized the ache of fundamental incompatibility, the desperate wish to change who you are to save a relationship. "I'm sorry," I said inadequately. "Don't be. It taught me what I refused to settle for." Julia turned to meet my eyes. Authenticity, someone brave enough to be seen with me. The implication hung between us like a challenge. Julia wasn't asking for casual romance or hidden affairs. She wanted partnership, visibility, the courage to build something real in full daylight. "I've never," I started, then stopped, unsure how to voice my inexperience with women. "I know," Julia said gently. "But that's not what scares you, is it?" She was right, as usual. My fear wasn't about gender or sexuality. It was about the terrifying possibility of being truly known by someone who might actually stay. The sun was setting, painting the canyon walls in shades of gold and crimson. Julia moved closer on the blanket, close enough that I could feel her warmth against my shoulder. "Erica," she said quietly, "I need you to know I'm falling for you." Hard and fast and completely against my better judgment. My breath caught. "Julia, I'm not asking for promises you can't make. I'm just telling you the truth." Before I could lose my nerve, I turned and kissed her, pouring 3 days of growing desire into the connection between us. Julia responded immediately, her arms coming around me as we sank back against the blanket. What followed was slow and reverent, a careful exploration that felt both foreign and perfectly natural. Julia's hands mapped my body with patient thoroughness while I discovered the geography of feminine desire. Every touch was a revelation. Every sigh a small miracle of connection I'd never experienced with any man. The desert air cooled our heated skin as we lay entwined afterward, watching stars emerge in the darkening sky above the canyon walls. Julia's fingers traced lazy patterns on my shoulder, and I felt fundamentally changed by the intimacy we'd shared. "What happens now?" I whispered against her neck. "Now we figure it out together," she replied, pressing a kiss to the top of my head. As we drove back to the resort in comfortable silence, my phone buzzed with messages from Seattle. Patients wondering about rescheduled appointments, colleagues asking about my extended absence, the demands of my carefully structured life pulling me back toward safety. But sitting beside Julia in the desert darkness, her hand warm in mine as she navigated the winding road, I realized I was no longer the same woman who delivered that lecture 4 days ago. That Erica had been sleepwalking through an existence that looked successful from the outside but felt hollow within. "I called my assistant this afternoon," I said suddenly. "Cleared my calendar for the rest of the week." Julia's hand tightened in mine, but she didn't say anything, letting the magnitude of my decision settle between us like a promise neither of us was quite ready to name. The resort's lights appeared ahead, welcoming us home to whatever we were brave enough to build together. Saturday morning found us wandering through Old Town Scottsdale, hands intertwined like teenagers discovering love for the first time. Julia had insisted on shopping, claiming I needed proper Phoenix attire for the blazing summer heat. The truth was simpler. We were both starved for normalcy, for the simple pleasure of being together without analyzing what it meant. "This place looks promising," Julia said, tugging me toward a cluttered antique shop wedged between a gallery and a coffee house. Inside, desert treasures felt like stepping into someone's attic after decades of collecting. Vintage furniture crowded narrow aisles while glass cases displayed jewelry, pottery, and mysterious objects that defied easy categorization. "Can I help you ladies find something specific?" asked the proprietor, a striking woman with silver-streaked hair and knowing eyes that seemed to see too much. "Just browsing," Julia replied, but her attention had already been captured by a display of old books near the back wall. I drifted through the maze of merchandise, running my fingers along dusty surfaces while stealing glances at Julia as she examined first editions. The domestic ease of it struck me. 2 women shopping together, disagreeing about the merits of a vintage lamp, sharing quiet jokes about particularly hideous decorative choices. "Erica, look at this," Julia called from a corner where leather-bound volumes created a towering display. She was holding what appeared to be a journal, its burgundy leather cover worn soft with age. Pages yellowed at the edges peeked out, and a thin ribbon bookmark dangled from the binding. "It's beautiful," I said, moving closer to examine the craftsmanship. "What is it?" "Personal correspondence," according to the tag. From the 1960s, Julia opened the cover carefully, revealing elegant handwriting in faded blue ink. "My dearest Catherine," the first entry began. "3 months have passed since you left Phoenix, and I count every sunrise until your promised return. Love letters," I breathed, fascinated despite myself. Julia flipped through several pages, revealing entry after entry of passionate correspondence between 2 women named Margaret and Catherine. The language was careful, coded in the way necessary for that era, but the devotion was unmistakable. "Ladies," the shop owner materialized beside us with the stealth of someone accustomed to observing customers. "That journal has quite a history." "Oh?" Julia looked up with interest. Margaret Whitfield kept it for nearly 40 years, documenting her relationship with Catherine Morrison. They lived together here in Phoenix, ran a guest house together back when such things required great discretion. A chill ran down my spine despite the shop's stuffy air. What happened to them? Margaret passed about 5 years ago. Catherine followed 6 months later, as these devoted couples often do. The woman's eyes held a strange intensity. Margaret's niece brought the journal in, said it needed to find the right people. Those were her exact words, the right people. Julia and I exchanged glances. There was something unsettling about the woman's emphasis, as if she knew more about us than casual observation should have revealed. "How much?" Julia asked, her grip tightening protectively on the journal. "For you two? Consider it a gift," Margaret would have approved. Before either of us could protest, she'd wrapped the journal in tissue paper and pressed it into my hands. Some things are meant to be passed along, not sold. We left the shop in bemused silence, the journal feeling heavier than its actual weight suggested. Back at the resort, Julia poured wine while I settled into the comfortable chair. Beside her bed, the journal resting on my lap like a secret waiting to be shared. "Should we read it?" I asked, suddenly uncertain about invading these women's privacy. "They're gone, Erica. And that woman was right about something needing to find the right people." I opened to a random page, my voice hesitant as I began reading aloud. April 15, 1964. Catherine returned from Los Angeles today, and the guest house feels alive again. Mrs. Henderson from next door brought cookies, making polite conversation while clearly trying to understand why two unmarried women share a residence. Julia settled beside me on the bed, her warmth a comforting presence as the words transported us into another era. Page by page, Margaret's entries revealed a love story spanning decades, the careful navigation of social expectations, the joy of finding someone who understood, the daily courage required to live authentically in a world that demanded invisibility. "Listen to this," Julia said, taking the journal to read a passage from 1968. "Today, Catherine said she wished we could marry properly, with flowers and witnesses and photographs to mark what we mean to each other. I told her we are married in every way that matters, witnessed by the desert stars and blessed by our own brave hearts." The words hung between us, heavy with relevance to our own situation. Here were two women who'd faced the same fears we were navigating, who'd chosen love despite the risks. As the evening deepened, our reading grew more intimate, Julia's voice growing husky, as she read passionate entries while my fingers traced patterns on her arm. The journal became a bridge between past and present, giving us permission to claim something that had always existed but rarely been acknowledged. "Erica," Julia whispered, setting the journal aside as our eyes met in the soft lamplight. What happened next felt inevitable, a continuation of the conversation begun by Margaret and Catherine decades earlier. Julia's hands framed my face as she kissed me with desperate tenderness, and I responded with a hunger that surprised us both. We made love with the journal beside us on the nightstand, its presence somehow blessing what we were building together. Afterward, as we lay entwined in the desert darkness, Julia traced lazy circles on my shoulder. "Do you think they're watching? Margaret and Catherine?" I considered the question seriously. "Maybe. If they are, I hope they approve." Julia's laugh was soft against my neck. Two women finding each other against all odds? I think they'd be thrilled. Outside, Phoenix glittered under the vast desert sky, and for the first time since arriving, I allowed myself to imagine staying permanently. The thought should have terrified me. Instead, it felt like coming home. Sunday brought Marcus Rodriguez, knocking at my guest suite door with morning coffee and a troubled expression. Julia's resort manager had been nothing but welcoming during my extended stay, but today his usual warmth seemed strained. "Dr. Howard, do you have a moment?" His voice carried an urgency that made my stomach clench. I invited him in, grateful Julia was still sleeping in her own quarters. Whatever Marcus needed to discuss, his demeanor suggested it wasn't purely professional. "I need to tell you something about Julia," he said without preamble, settling uncomfortably on the suite's small sofa. "About her past relationship." Every protective instinct I'd developed over the past week flared to life. "Marcus, I'm not sure this is appropriate. Please, just listen. Julia won't tell you herself, and you need to know what you're walking into." His earnestness convinced me to remain silent while he gathered his thoughts. Marcus had worked for Julia since the resort's inception, and his loyalty to her was unmistakable. Sarah Chen, her ex-partner, was terrified of public scrutiny, not just about being gay, but about Julia's visibility in the hospitality industry. Every community event, every business meeting, every photograph in the local paper became a source of conflict. I sank into the chair across from him, processing this information. The resort's success meant Julia couldn't remain hidden, couldn't pretend to be something she wasn't. It destroyed them, Marcus continued. Sarah demanded Julia choose between the business and their relationship. When Julia refused, Sarah left, took half their shared savings and disappeared to Portland. The pain in his voice told me he'd watched Julia suffer through this betrayal. No wonder she'd been gun-shy about relationships. No wonder my own nervousness about public attention triggered her defensive responses. "Why are you telling me this?" I asked quietly. "Because yesterday at the coffee shop, I saw how you tensed when that couple recognized you from the convention. Julia saw it too, though she didn't say anything." Damn. I'd hoped my momentary panic had gone unnoticed when two therapists approached our table, effusive about my presentation and clearly curious about my companion. Julia had handled the interaction gracefully, but I'd felt exposed, unprepared for the reality of being seen together. "Marcus, it's complicated. It always is. But Julia's invested in you, Dr. Howard. More invested than she's been in anyone since Sarah. If you're going to run, do it now before she falls completely." His bluntness stung because it hit so close to my own fears. I was falling for Julia just as hard, but the practical realities felt overwhelming. My practice in Seattle, my professional reputation, the scrutiny that came with loving someone so publicly successful. After Marcus left, I found myself walking the resort grounds, trying to process his warnings. "The journal from yesterday's shopping trip had kept me awake, Margaret," his words echoing in my mind about choosing love despite fear. But theory was easier than practice. My phone buzzed with a text from Seattle, a reminder that Dr. Patricia Westfield, my longtime mentor, expected a call about potential collaboration on her latest research project. Patricia had been like a mother to me through graduate school, guiding my career with wisdom and unwavering support. "Erica, darling." Her familiar voice warmed me when I called. "How's Phoenix treating you? Marcus mentioned you'd extended your stay." We chatted about the conference, my observations of Julia's resort, the potential applications for my research. Then Patricia's tone shifted, becoming more personal. "I have something to share that might interest you. I've been cleaning out Mother's belongings since her passing, and I found something unexpected." Patricia's mother had died 6 months earlier at 93, a formidable woman who'd taught high school English for 4 decades. I'd met her several times at academic gatherings, always impressed by her sharp wit and progressive views. I discovered a collection of letters hidden in her bedroom closet. "Love letters, Erica. Written to someone named Margaret Whitfield here in Phoenix." My blood froze. "Margaret Whitfield? You know the name?" I stared across the resort's garden toward Julia's office, where she was undoubtedly planning our day together. The coincidence felt too profound to be accidental. "Patricia, I think I may have found Margaret's journals. The woman from your mother's letters." The silence stretched between us as we both processed the implications. Patricia's mother, Dr. Elizabeth Morrison, had been Catherine Morrison, the love of Margaret's life chronicled in every page we'd read last night. "My mother never told me," Patricia whispered. 40 years of Christmas dinners and faculty parties, and I never knew she'd lived this whole other life before marriage. The times were different. She had to choose visibility or authenticity. "Like you're choosing now?" Patricia's question hit like a physical blow. My mentor, the woman who'd shaped my career, was confronting me with the same choice her mother had faced decades earlier. "I don't know what you mean. Erica, I've known you for 15 years. You've never taken a week's vacation, never missed a conference for personal reasons. Yet here you are, extending a Phoenix trip indefinitely. That speaks to something significant." Her perceptiveness shouldn't have surprised me. Patricia had guided countless graduate students through personal crises disguised as academic decisions. "It's complicated," I said weakly. Mother lived with complicated for 30 years after leaving Phoenix. She married my father because it was expected, raised me with love but always with a piece of herself held back. I grew up feeling like she was waiting for something that never came. The tragedy in Patricia's voice made my chest tight. I'm sorry. Don't be sorry. Be smarter. Mother spent decades regretting her choice to prioritize safety over love. The night before she died, she told me about Margaret, about the life she'd abandoned for respectability. Her last words were about wishing she'd been braver. I closed my eyes, feeling the weight of generations of hidden love, of women who'd chosen survival over authenticity, but also feeling the possibility of breaking that cycle, of choosing differently. The letters mention a journal, Patricia continued. Mother said Margaret kept detailed records of their relationship. She always wondered what happened to it. It found its way to us, I said softly. Julia and I discovered it yesterday. And maybe this is meant to be, Erica. Maybe some stories are meant to have different endings. After ending the call, I sat in the garden for a long time, watching Julia through her office window as she worked with characteristic intensity. The revelation about Catherine and Margaret's connection to my mentor felt like cosmic intervention, a sign that some loves transcend time and circumstance. But knowledge and courage were different things entirely. Monday started with anonymous voicemails. Julia played them for me over breakfast, her hands trembling slightly. As threat after hateful threat poured through her phone speaker, someone had noticed our weekend shopping trip, seen us holding hands, and decided Desert Oasis Resort needed to be taught a lesson about family values. They're targeting the business specifically, Julia said, scrolling through emails that made my stomach turn. Threatening to organize boycotts, spread lies about our family-friendly accommodations. I watched her face carefully mask the pain these attacks caused. This wasn't just about bigotry directed at her personally, it was an assault on everything she'd built for vulnerable children and their families. Have you called the police? What can they do? No direct threats of violence, just economic intimidation and hate speech. Julia's laugh was bitter. Welcome to loving someone visible in a conservative state. The timing felt like a punch to the gut. Just when I was beginning to imagine a future together, reality crashed. Down with reminders of exactly what that future would cost. In Seattle, I could disappear into academic circles where progressive values were assumed. Here, with Julia, hiding wasn't an option. By noon, 3 local news stations had called requesting interviews about the controversy. Apparently, someone had leaked photos of us from the antique shop, spinning a narrative about the corruption of family-oriented businesses by radical agendas. I need to respond, Julia said, pacing her office with the restless energy of a caged animal. Ignoring this only makes it worse. Maybe you should consider their demands, I heard myself saying. Temporarily tone down the visibility until things calm down. Julia stopped pacing abruptly, her blue eyes turning to ice. What did you just suggest? I'm being practical, Julia. Business comes first. You can't help anyone if the resort fails. Business comes first. She repeated my words like they tasted toxic. That's your solution? Go back in the closet to appease homophobes? Heat flooded my cheeks. That's not what I meant, isn't it? Because it sounds exactly like something Sarah would have said. Hide who we are, pretend to be something we're not, sacrifice our integrity for financial security. The comparison hit like a slap. I'm not Sarah. Then prove it. Julia moved closer, her voice dropping to a dangerous whisper. Hold my hand when we walk through downtown Phoenix. Let me introduce you as my girlfriend at the community meeting tomorrow night. Show me you're brave enough to be seen with me. My throat closed completely. Everything she was asking felt immense, terrifying, like jumping off a cliff without knowing if wings would appear. My academic reputation, my carefully constructed professional image, the safety of my anonymous Seattle existence all hung in the balance. I need time to think, I whispered. Julia's expression crumbled, hope dying in her eyes like flame being extinguished. Time. Right. That's what they all say when they're trying to find a polite way to run. Julia, please. No, Erica. I've been here before. The woman who says she loves me but can't risk being associated with me publicly. The promises of eventually, someday, when the timing is better. Julia's voice cracked with old pain layered under fresh betrayal. I won't beg someone to stay who's already planning their escape. I wanted to deny it, to insist she was wrong, but the words stuck in my throat because part of her accusation rang true. I had been calculating exit strategies since the first threatening voicemail, wondering how quickly I could return to Seattle if things became too complicated. "Maybe we moved too fast," I said weakly. "Maybe we did." Julia walked to her office window, staring out at the desert landscape she'd cultivated with such love. Marcus was right. I should have protected myself better. The admission that she'd discussed our relationship with Marcus stung, but not as much as the defeat in her voice. This vibrant, confident woman who'd created something beautiful from nothing was shrinking before my eyes, and I was the cause. That evening, I sat alone in my guest suite while Julia attended emergency meetings with her staff and attorneys. The journal lay open beside me, Margaret's words from 1967 seeming to speak directly to my cowardice. Catherine left for Los Angeles again today, claiming family obligations require her presence. But I know the truth. Mrs. Peterson from the church council cornered her after Sunday service, asking pointed questions about our living arrangement. Catherine panicked, as she always does when faced with scrutiny. She chooses safety over truth, propriety over love, and I am left to wonder if devotion means anything when tested by adversity. I slammed the journal closed, unable to bear Margaret's pain echoing my own situation so precisely. Outside my window, Phoenix glittered under the desert stars, beautiful and unforgiving as everything else about this place that had become home before I'd had the courage to claim it. My phone buzzed with a text from Patricia in Seattle, asking about my return date for the collaboration she'd mentioned. Normal life beckoned, safe and predictable and empty of the terrifying joy I'd found in Julia's arms. But also empty of Julia herself. Around midnight, I heard footsteps outside my door. Julia's voice, soft and broken, barely audible through the thick walls. "I know you're awake, Erica. I just wanted to say that whatever you decide, I understand. Love isn't always enough. Sometimes courage fails, and that's not entirely your fault." I pressed my hand against the door, wishing I could reach through wood and space to touch her, to promise things I wasn't sure I could deliver. "I love you too," she continued, so quietly I almost missed it. "For whatever that's worth." Her footsteps faded across the courtyard, leaving me alone with the weight of choices I wasn't prepared to make. Outside, a desert storm was building on the horizon, lightning flickering against dark clouds like a warning about what was coming. By dawn, I would have to decide who I wanted to be, the woman who played it safe, or the one brave enough to love without guarantees in a world determined to punish authenticity. The journal lay beside me, waiting for my choice to write the next chapter of its continuing story. Tuesday's dust storm hit Phoenix like divine intervention, trapping everyone indoors while winds howled through the desert with biblical fury. I found myself stranded in the resort's main lodge with Julia and a dozen guests, emergency lighting casting strange shadows as sand pelted the reinforced windows. Julia moved through the space with professional grace, ensuring guests felt safe despite nature's tantrum outside. She avoided my eyes completely, maintaining polite distance while distributing blankets and organizing impromptu activities. The careful choreography of her avoidance told me everything about how deeply I'd wounded her. "Storm should pass by midnight," Marcus announced, checking weather reports on his phone. "Everyone's comfortable here until then." As evening settled into the lodge's cozy atmosphere, other guests gradually retired to claim sleeping areas in alcoves and corners. Julia remained by the massive stone fireplace, staring into flames that painted her profile in golden shadow. "Julia," I said quietly, approaching despite knowing she might reject any attempt at conversation. "Erica." Her voice was carefully neutral. "Having second thoughts about your flight tomorrow?" The question carried layers of meaning. My departure was scheduled for Wednesday morning, my retreat to Seattle safety already arranged. Everyone knew, including me, that leaving now meant permanent ending to whatever we'd built together. About everything, I admitted, settling into the chair beside hers without invitation, about running, about choosing fear over possibility, about letting other people's hatred dictate my choices. Julia's mask slipped slightly, revealing exhaustion beneath her composed exterior. "Fear makes sense, Erica. This isn't easy for anyone. Tell me about the worst of it," I said suddenly. "Not just yesterday's calls, the real cost of living openly here." Julia studied my face, perhaps measuring my readiness for complete honesty. Then she began speaking, her voice low and steady as the storm raged outside. After Sarah left, I received death threats for 6 months. Someone vandalized my car twice, spray-painted slurs across the resort's entrance sign. The police were sympathetic, but ultimately useless. My stomach clenched, but I forced myself to listen without interrupting. Business dropped 40% that first year. Families who'd booked months in advance suddenly canceled, citing schedule conflicts. Banks questioned my loan applications more aggressively. Insurance rates somehow increased. Each revelation felt like a physical blow, but also like necessary education about the reality I'd been too naive to comprehend. The worst part wasn't the strangers, Julia continued. It was watching people I'd considered friends reveal their true beliefs when my sexuality became public knowledge. Discovering that acceptance had always been conditional on invisibility. Lightning illuminated the lodge's interior, followed immediately by thunder that shook the building's foundations. The storm's intensity seemed to mirror the emotional tempest between us, forcing confrontation we'd both been avoiding. "Why do you stay?" I asked. "Why not move somewhere easier?" Julia's smile was sad but resolute. "Because running gives them what they want. And because this place isn't just mine anymore. It belongs to every neurodivergent child who's found safety here, every family who's discovered they're not alone." Her courage humbled me completely. While I'd been calculating personal costs and professional risks, Julia had been fighting battles much larger than herself. "I've been selfish," I said quietly. "You've been human. Self-preservation is natural. So is love. And I love you, Julia. Not carefully, not conditionally, not with escape routes pre-planned. Just completely, terrifyingly, with everything I have." Julia's composure finally cracked, tears threatening but held back by years of practiced strength. "Love isn't always enough, Erica. Sometimes circumstances are stronger than feelings. Then we change the circumstances." Before she could respond, I kissed her with desperate urgency, pouring weeks of suppressed passion into the connection between us. Julia resisted for exactly 1 heartbeat before surrendering completely, her arms pulling me closer as we lost ourselves in each other despite our audience of sleeping guests. What followed was careful and quiet but no less intense for its restraint. We made love by firelight while the storm provided cover for whispered endearments and stifled sighs. Every touch carried the weight of decision, every kiss a promise about the future we were brave enough to claim together. Afterward, we lay entwined on the makeshift bed we'd created from couch cushions and blankets, watching flames dance in the stone hearth while wind continued its assault on the world outside. "The journal," I said suddenly, remembering Margaret's words about choosing love despite adversity. Catherine came back to Margaret despite the social pressure, didn't she? Eventually. But not before years of separation and regret. I traced patterns on Julia's bare shoulder, marveling at the softness of her skin in the flickering light. What if we refuse to waste those years? What if we choose differently than they did? Julia lifted her head to study my face. "What are you saying?" "I'm saying I want to relocate my practice to Phoenix. I want to stand beside you at community meetings and hold your hand, in public, and tell anyone who asks that I'm proud to love you." The declaration surprised us both with its completeness. 2 weeks ago, such a statement would have been unthinkable. Tonight, it felt like the only possible choice for a woman who'd finally discovered what authentic living meant. Julia's tears fell freely now, landing on my skin like desert rain. "You can't make decisions like that in the middle of a crisis, Erica. When morning comes, when the storm ends, you might feel differently. Then ask me again when morning comes." We held each other until dawn, talking quietly about practical matters like professional transitions and real estate, but mostly just absorbing the reality of commitment made without guarantees. Outside, the storm gradually exhausted itself, leaving behind the clean clarity that desert air always offered after violent weather. When sunlight finally streamed through the lodge's windows, Julia stirred in my arms, her blue eyes finding mine with cautious hope. "It's morning," she said softly. "Ask me. Erica Howard, will you stay in Phoenix and build something beautiful with me, knowing it won't be easy?" I kissed her forehead, then her lips, tasting forever in the connection we'd chosen despite every reasonable objection. "Try and stop me." The storm had passed, leaving us changed in its wake like everything else the desert had tested and found worthy of survival. 6 weeks after the storm, I stood before the Phoenix City Council with Julia's hand firm in mine, my voice steady as I addressed concerns about Desert Oasis Resort's expansion plans. The community meeting was packed, journalists in the back row, cameras recording every word of my testimony about the critical need for neurodivergent-friendly hospitality. Dr. Howard, Councilmember Jenkins interrupted. Your professional credentials are impressive, but some constituents question your objectivity given your personal relationship with Ms. Lee. My relationship with Julia makes me more objective, not less, I replied without hesitation. I've witnessed firsthand how proper accommodations transform lives. This expansion isn't just business development, it's social justice. Applause erupted from supporters while opposition grumbled, but I felt only pride in Julia's grip tightening around my fingers. 3 months ago, I would have wilted under such scrutiny. Tonight, I welcome the spotlight as opportunity to advocate for something larger than myself. The vote passed 7-2. Approving Desert Oasis's expansion with unanimous praise for our innovative programming. As we left the building, Julia pulled me into a kiss right there on the council steps. Photographers capturing the moment that would appear in tomorrow's newspaper. Not bad for a former closet case, I whispered against her lips. Outstanding for any kind of case. Julia's smile was radiant in the streetlight glow. Margaret and Catherine would be proud. The journal had become our relationship compass, Margaret's entries guiding us through challenges they'd never had the chance to face openly. We donated their love letters to the local historical society, ensuring their story became part of Phoenix's official record. Speaking of proud, Julia said, producing a small velvet box from her jacket pocket, I have something to ask you. My breath caught as she dropped to one knee right there on the government building steps. Traffic streaming past while curious onlookers gathered to witness what was unfolding. Erica Howard, you turned my world upside down with your brilliant mind and brave heart. You chose love over safety, authenticity over comfort, us over everything that came before. Tears blurred my vision as she opened the box, revealing a stunning ring, with a stone that caught the desert moonlight, like captured starfire. Will you marry me and help me prove that some love stories get happy endings? Yes, I breathed. Then louder for everyone to hear. Yes, absolutely yes. The small crowd that had gathered burst into spontaneous applause as Julia slipped the ring onto my finger. Someone shouted congratulations, a car honked approval, and I realized we were surrounded by the community we'd been afraid would reject us. 6 months later, we stood in the resort's garden where we'd shared our first kiss, surrounded by family and friends as judge. Patricia Westfield, my former mentor who'd flown in from Seattle, pronounced us married under Arizona's clear autumn sky. By the power vested in me by the state of Arizona, I now pronounce you wife and wife. You may kiss your bride. As our lips met to seal the promise we'd made, I heard Margaret's voice in the desert wind, a whisper of approval. From women who'd loved without legal recognition but with no less devotion than what Julia and I now claimed. During the reception, Ivy Chen, the antique dealer who'd gifted us the journal, approached with a knowing smile and another leather-bound volume. This belonged to the same estate, she explained, pressing the book into Julia's hands. Something tells me you'll know what to do with it. Inside the front cover, Margaret's handwriting proclaimed, for the next 2 women brave enough to choose love over fear. May your ending be happier than ours was long. The pages were blank, waiting for our story to fill them. Under the stars that had witnessed Margaret and Catherine's secret devotion, Julia and I danced to music that celebrated love in all its forms. My Seattle practice was thriving with Phoenix patients. The resort's expansion was ahead of schedule, and the threats that had once terrified us had faded into background noise compared to the joy we'd built together. Any regrets? Julia whispered as we swayed to the final song. I looked around at the celebration we'd created, the friends who'd supported us, the community that had ultimately embraced what we represented. Then I looked into the blue eyes of the woman who'd taught me that fear was just another obstacle to overcome. Only that it took me 52 years to find you. Julia's laugh was pure music in the desert night. Good things are worth waiting for. As our guests prepared to leave and the evening wound toward its close, we walked, hand in hand to the quiet corner where we'd first confessed our feelings. The journal rested on the small table where we'd left it, Margaret and Catherine's story complete, our own just beginning. Same time next year? Julia asked, referring to the anniversary celebration we'd already started planning. Same time every year for the rest of our lives, I promised, sealing the vow with a kiss that tasted like forever under the vast Arizona sky. The desert had tested us and found us worthy. Now it would witness whatever came next in the continuing story of two women who did chosen love over fear and discovered that some risks are worth everything.